Thank you, Faye, and thanks to all of you for coming to proposal development workshop number 6, editing your proposal. So my name is Daniel Freud, and I am the grant proposal editor in the Office of the Vice Dean for Research and Innovation in the Fulton Schools of Engineering. Just for a little bit of background about me so that you know where I'm coming from, I've worked in this role for about 7 months. And actually, I think Faye invited me to do this workshop right after I started. So I've been thinking about this presentation for the entire time I've worked here. I have a PhD in English literature from Purdue, and my professional background ranges from copy editing articles for a peer-reviewed humanities journal to teaching composition and literature at the college level to technical writing. So I have experience working with pros across disciplines, from writers at every level, from first-year college students to grad students to senior faculty. I also know what it's like on the other side as a writer working with a copy editor. My advice in this workshop will focus on things I've observed in my own work, and I tried to make sure that it's applicable across both disciplines and experience levels. Today, I'll discuss the importance of editing your proposals and provide some strategies for taking a closer look at your own writing. I know from firsthand experience that academic writing is challenging, and one reason why proposal writing is especially tough is that it is in some ways fundamentally different from other kinds of research-based writing. Especially for newer faculty, I think it's tough to transition from the broader scope of the dissertation, which requires detail, exposition, and so on, showing your work, so to speak, to the very tight style of proposal writing, which is in some ways the opposite. First, I'd like to discuss the process we use in the Fulton schools. Then I'll provide some advice for editing your own work, talk through some specific issues of style, grammar, and usage to be aware of. So in my corner of ASU, we built editing as an option into the grant proposal process from the very beginning. This slide just shows a sort of workflow. Faculty can request my assistance on the intake form. So they write their proposals, they send it to me for editing. I send it back for revising and sometimes discussing those changes. And sometimes I do a second round of editing. I think it's important to emphasize that editing the proposal is not a frill or an option in like the last 48 hours before you submit, but a significant part of the process, a key step between completing a draft and submitting it. Whether you seek out a professional editor or set aside time to give your own work a careful polish, everyone can benefit from editing, no matter their experience or skill level. My goal here is to provide you with some things to think about and strategies to use when approaching editing your own work. So as I mentioned, our faculty can use the proposal intake form to request help. So if there are any engineers out there, I hope you're listening, you can use the intake form to get in touch with me. Knowledge Enterprise also has a proposal editing service for all faculty, shown on this slide. Or if you have the funds to hire an external professional editor, KE has an extensive list of people you can reach out to. And Faye will send you this PowerPoint later so you can click on the links. The purpose of editing is to help you communicate your ideas as clearly as possible. It's important to recognize the difference between information and communication. On this slide, I'm quoting from an excellent article, George Gopin and Judith Swan's The Science of Scientific Writing. They referenced this article in the last PDW on proposal writing, and I'm here to help evangelize about it. It's really good whether or not you are in a STEM field. It offers a lot of valuable research-based advice on how readers approach information and how to work with readers' expectations for prose rather than against those expectations. As they say, the fundamental purpose of scientific discourse is not the mere presentation of information and thought, but rather its actual communication. So when you're writing a proposal or an article or really any other kind of academic writing, your goal is not merely to represent your ideas as they are in your brain, right? It's to communicate them so that the reader not only understands them accurately, but feels some kind of investment or interest in them. And this is especially true of proposals when you are trying to engage readers in order to seek funds. Similarly, editing is not just about identifying and correcting issues of grammar, mechanics, and style, but about improving the overall clarity of the writer's work and ensuring that the document achieves its purpose. Thus, editing plays a crucial role in the proposal development process, again, whether you seek out a professional or attempt it on your own. So now I'd like to show you an example to get us in the right frame of mind for thinking about the difference between information and communication. And this is, again, taken from the Gopin and Swan article. It gets at the relationship between substance and structure, and you need both. Your ideas already have substance. That's why you're an expert who's preparing grant proposals in the first place. But you also want to structure them in a logical and easy to understand way. So imagine that an investigator tracks the temperature of a liquid over a period of time, taking measurements every 3 minutes and recording a list of temperatures. The next slide shows 2 ways to represent that information. So again, tracking the temperature of a liquid over a period of time. So would anyone like to offer a comment on which version is better or worse and explain why you think so?
Quinn offers in the chat, right is easier to read.
Right is easier to read. Yes, that's exactly right. The format on the left is not very good. Right, we get another comment from Tracy AC, right is much better. The one on the left I'd actually say is quite bad. The information is all crammed together. The reader has to do a lot of work to unpack the information. When I see that block of letters and numbers, I don't even process it because I don't want to, right? It's too much work. On the right, the table provides an easily understood format and context. We've all encountered tables at one point or another. We can grasp what's going on much more quickly. So in a sense, the table is invisible in that you don't have to work hard sorting out what goes where. Within seconds, you can understand what's going on. The text on the left draws attention to itself, and that's not a good thing. The key point is that the version on the right makes the reader do less work. And I think that's sort of the goal of good proposal writing and good editing, to produce a document that avoids making the reader work too hard to understand your ideas, while preserving the complexity and the interest of those ideas. Especially in the context of proposals, there's a lot of competition and readers are working very quickly through those big stacks. And the proposals that will stick out to them are those that are clear, engaging, elegant, and well-written. Which isn't to say that you need to simplify your ideas. In fact, I think that clarifying your writing has the opposite effect. A good editing job can make your thinking sharper, I think. So now I'd like to walk through some strategies for writers to keep in mind. First, I would like to reiterate that it's always a great idea to take advantage of professional editing. And here at ASU, you have options. If you are an engineer, you can work with me, but anyone across ASU can work with KE's editing service. Trained editors can handle a document respectfully and skillfully. They can preserve the writer's ideas and intentions while sharpening the prose and eliminating errors. They're also less attached to the document in question. It's hard to edit your own work because you're too familiar with it, and I will gladly own up to that. When it comes to my own writing, I absolutely need editors because when I look at my own work, I don't see the same things that an outside party does. It's too familiar. But all that said, sometimes we want or need to edit our own work for a variety of reasons. Perhaps we lack the time or the funds, or we simply want to develop that skill. So I'd like to talk about how to do it more responsibly. My first tip is to use software with caution. Services like Grammarly and Microsoft Word's built-in editor have become, I think, increasingly popular and common, and they do have a purpose, but they should be used carefully. I feel the need to talk about them because, as I said, they're common, they're widely available and frequently used, and they're not going anywhere. I understand why people want to use them, and actually professional editors often make use of them as well. They're very good at catching some things. Grammar mistakes such as subject-verb agreement or inconsistent verb tenses, sometimes wordiness, sometimes usage issues. For example, using slang or informal language will likely earn you a squiggly line. However, these services are better at locating errors than editing for style. They can detect where a problem occurs, but they are not so good at finding a solution. And this is especially true when it comes to more specialized content, such as grant proposals. These services can't provide structural editing and an understanding of context. Keep in mind, of course, that they're built for a range of users in every conceivable field, right? So Grammarly or Words editor don't understand the purpose of a proposal or know about length requirements, audience, etc. So here's a simple example of the limitations of this software. I ran my talking points for this very workshop through Words editor. Let's take a look. So the editor flagged the following phrase. An investigator tracks the temperature of a liquid over a period of time. And I get the suggestion to correct it to a period, right? So it would read tracks the temperature of a liquid over a period. And that's not correct, right? It's unclear, and it's not how we use language. If I were to shorten the phrase, and I could, I would drop the other part of it so that it reads tracks the temperature of a liquid over time. So as I suggested, the editor has found a potential problem area. It flags my writing for conciseness, which happens a lot to me, by the way, but it doesn't know how to fix it in the best way possible. And Grammarly works much the same way. This is why you still need a set of human eyes on your work. If you use a service like this, carefully scrutinize the passages it flags, but don't automatically accept every suggestion. Think about whether the alternatives are logical or make sense when spoken out loud. You might be better off thinking of your own. My second tip is to make use of resources online that can help refine your understanding of grammar and usage. Maybe it's the former educator in me speaking, or maybe it's just my own personal preference. I like to know when I do make a mistake or need to improve something. I want to know not just what to do, but the why and how, right? So I often point people to resources that can give them that understanding. You can find books as well, but today I'm going to stick to free online resources. Grammarly actually has a very useful website. It has an online guide to grammar and punctuation in a blog, so you can consult those resources for example sentences, rules about using commas, and things like that. Also, dictionary websites are great when you need to look for examples of usage. For example, one thing that trips me up sometimes is which prepositions to use with which words, such as suitable, so suitable to, suitable for. Sometimes I need a refresher, so I use sites like Merriam-Webster or Collins. Those are my favorites. Third tip. Get some distance. It's hard to edit your own work, as I've been saying. It's just too familiar. So when you do, it's best to approach it with as fresh an eye as possible. Give yourself a weekend or more to put it away and avoid looking at it. And this is true for a copy edit, a deeper revision, anything. You need to give yourself some time to read some other kinds of prose, right? Read a book for fun, look at social media, right? Refresh your brain. Avoid looking at your proposal so that when you come back to it, you have a refreshed perspective. There are other strategies you can use as well to defamiliarize your work. For example, you can try reading problematic passages out loud. Often hearing sentences verbally can alert you to lengthy sentences or awkward phrasing. Fourth tip, get a buddy. Many proposals have multiple authors, which can be handy for a round of switching sections and editing each other's contributions. Whether or not that's the case for you, it can be helpful and rewarding to share writing with a friend or colleague in addition to employing a professional editor. The good thing about working with someone over time is that they and you will begin to notice your quirks, and you can learn to self-correct. So in a way, I'm actually advocating for having a writing group. And I'll give an example from my own experience. In grad school, when I wrote my dissertation, I had a writing group, and my friends came to know that my #1 issue as a writer was creating enormous paragraphs, sometimes pushing 2 full pages or more, which means that I left my readers with these huge blocks of dense text that were quite unpleasant to wade through. But because I repeatedly shared my writing with them, they noticed that I kept doing it, and so did I. So I became aware of the issue and tried to avoid it. In other words, a little bit of lighthearted public shaming helped me to correct some of my common flaws as a writer. So get a buddy. All right, so now I'd like to transition to discussing some elements of good style. As I've been suggesting, and as the graphic also suggests, one of the keys to good style is a fairly simple point: understanding your reader's expectations and playing to them rather than resisting them, and also making them work less hard. There's a time and a place for avoiding reader expectations for prose, but that's more in the realm of like experimental poetry, right? Maybe not for your grant proposal. So I'll talk through some points that I think will help you attain more elegant writing in your proposals. So think of each section, paragraph, and sentence within your proposal as a unit or building block within its larger structure. And each one of these things should be doing work for you. It should matter to the proposal. As I said, one of my weaknesses as a writer was composing mega paragraphs. These are not only unpleasant to read, but poorly structured. They reflect the way that I think and the way that many others think as well. I tend to write myself into my ideas, figuring out what I really want to see only at the end of a writing session. So I would have to go back, reread what I wrote, and then find the topic sentence, find what I was really trying to say about whatever happened to be. So a paragraph like this does not succeed at communicating my ideas, right? It succeeds at communicating the sometimes muddled mess within my brain. But the point of revision is to take that material and shape it into something more orderly, more effective, and easier to read. So again, proposals should communicate your ideas rather than reflect your thoughts. So readers expect the beginning of the sentence or the beginning of the paragraph to establish the topic. Well-organized paragraphs with clear topic sentences are especially important in proposals as they assist your reader in navigating the document. And again, readers are getting through these materials quickly. They don't want to wade through a page-long paragraph to figure out what it's about. Or if they're going to go back and reread something, they're going to look to the topic sentences first in order to skim their way through the document. And the end of the sentence or paragraph is a good place to put new information that you want to stick in your readers' heads, that you want to sort of leave with them as you move on to the next thing. So I want to take a look at an example for a moment. I messed around with the paragraph from an NSF blog post about broader impacts. Take a moment to read the sentences and think about the organization of the paragraph. And if you have any comments on the paragraph, go ahead and share them in the chat. Oh, and I see Faye wrote in the comments, she knows someone who reads his proposals out loud a week before submission. I read these workshop materials out loud maybe 4 or 5 times at least. Of course, this is a verbal presentation, but reading out loud can be very helpful. And now I'll stop talking so you can look at the paragraph. And again, if you have any thoughts about the paragraph structure, go ahead and put them in the chat. Yes, the sentences in this paragraph are quite long and could, I think, pretty easily be broken out. Quinn says that he's forgotten at the end of the paragraph what the first 2 sentences said, and Victoria said she had trouble following the commas. Yeah, I think all these comments are pointing to the same thing. This paragraph is a little hard to follow. It seems like it's a little bit all over the place, right? So again, there are a lot of topics introduced. This is a real paragraph that I found online. However, I switched the sentences around in order to confuse you. The paragraph starts with a sentence about the relationship between society and research and a couple of examples. And then at the end, we get a connection to broader impacts and the broader impact statement in NSF proposals. So it's kind of hard to tell what's going on, right? A paragraph structured in this way suppresses the main point, and it does a disservice to the writer. Because it requires readers to spend extra time with the paragraph trying to figure out exactly what the writer's trying to say. So I'm going to show you the paragraph again. I haven't edited the sentences at all. I agree that these sentences could use some editing, but I just rearranged the sentences to put it in an order that might be a little bit more logical. Again, the sentences still need some work, but let's think about the paragraph structure. So now we start with a relatively short, clear sentence about the broader impact statement, right? A critical component of any research proposal submitted to NSF. So this sentence clearly gets across what the paragraph is supposed to be about. The next sentence explains a little bit more about what broader impacts are for. Then we get the examples, which again should be broken up. And then the final sentence leaves us with something to think about the connection between society and research. Is this paragraph perfect? No. However, I think that the order of these sentences makes it a little bit easier to follow, because that first sentence is relatively short, it's direct, it's very clear to understand what it's about. So in terms of your own writing, take a look at your paragraphs when you're revising. Think about what each paragraph is supposed to do. Is this a paragraph about broader impacts? Is this a paragraph about workforce development or something like that? If it is, and the topic sentence doesn't reflect that, that's an opportunity for you to revise to make sure that it does. I see this kind of thing in engineering proposals, but it happens to all of us, no matter the discipline. I see a sentence or a comment. Is the first sentence really necessary if this paragraph is in the broader impact section of an NSF proposal? Oh, I should clarify. This wasn't in a proposal. This was in a blog post about broader impact statements. And I think the purpose of the blog post was like how to write better broader impact statements. So in that case, it is helpful to have a statement about what the broader impact statement is supposed to do. So again, well-organized paragraphs with clear topic sentences are a must in proposals, or really any kind of writing, because they help readers navigate the document. And you can think of each sentence as a kind of mini argument, establishing the claims that you make within the paragraph. All right, so my next point has to do with sentence structure and subject and verb separation. So as readers of English prose, one thing that we expect is for the subject and the verb to be close together. I can give you a couple of very short example sentences. I edit the proposal, she talks to me, and so on. But even in the case of more complicated styles of writing, such as academic writing, having the subject and verb closer together can still make the sentence much easier to follow. So I want to show you an example sentence, and this is a sentence that has multiple issues, but one of them is that the subject and the verb are very far away. So first, the subject here, the smallest of the URFs. This is kind of a difficult subject to identify because it's not one thing, right? It's a whole phrase. The smallest of the URFs, URF-A6L, a 207 nucleotide reading frame overlapping out of phase, the NHC, it's so long, it's like, but by the time I get into the second line, I've already kind of lost my place. And it's not until we get to the third line that we get the verb, or the verb phrase has been identified. The subject and the verb are far apart, so it's difficult to make our way through the sentence. A very easy way to correct this is to simply split the sentence in two. So these sentences, maybe not as refined as they could be. However, now we have this, the smallest of the URFs is, and then we get an explanation for what that is, what it means, then a semicolon, and then a new subject. It has been identified as the animal equivalent of the recently discovered yeast gene. So it's helpful to try to keep subjects and verbs close together, because then readers can pretty quickly figure out what the sentence is intended to be about. If your subjects and verbs are very far apart, it makes the sentences difficult to wade through. All right, so for the remainder of the presentation, I'd like to talk about some common issues in grammar and usage. And the tips that I provide will help you to improve the clarity of your prose, and they may also save you a precious few lines worth of text. Something I'm asked to do a lot when I edit proposals is to reduce wordiness, given that proposals tend to have pretty stringent requirements for document length. And the samples here are inspired by documents I've encountered in the past, but again, they're applicable across disciplines. All right, so first one, passive voice. Passive voice is extremely common in academic writing, and I think especially in STEM fields. I think writers often feel concerned about using I. However, direct language is much clearer, easier to read, and more elegant. Passive voice rather than active voice obscures meaning, who or what is doing something. Sometimes that ambiguity is unavoidable or even more helpful. Think of a news report on a crime, for example. The house on 3rd Street was broken into. The man was robbed. We may not know who did it, right? Who did the breaking and entering, who did the robbery, and so on. The important details are that a house was broken into. So in that case, the passive construction makes sense. But in proposals, it's best to avoid that kind of indirect language. Because again, one of the goals of effective proposal writing is to avoid making the readers work hard. And passive voice may sometimes ask the readers to fill in details or gaps. Also, passive voice takes up more room on the page, so if space is at a premium, it needs to go. All right, so this slide shows a couple of examples. You can spot passive voice whenever you see a form of to be, is, are, were, followed by a participle, a form of the verb that often ends in ed, is given, was, earned, were, analyzed, and so on. So we can look at these two examples here. Preliminary research was carried out. That's very easy to flip, right? We have carried out preliminary research. Or the second one, which I think is an even less effective sentence, emphasis will be given to developing a prototype. Instead, you can specify either who's doing it or when it will happen. The first phase of our research will emphasize developing a prototype. These examples here are more direct, they're more elegant. So try to get in the habit of spotting passive voice in your own writing and flipping them around. All right, next is nominalization and adjectivization. These are long words for what happens when you turn a verb into a noun or an adjective. These are not technically errors. However, both of them tend to make your prose wordier and clunkier. And the slide shows a couple of examples. Look for adjectives that end in IVE and nouns that end in TION. That's not always going to be, that's not like an ironclad rule, but it can help. So the first example, this method is reflective of previous research. Reflective is an adjectivized form of the verb reflect. You can change it to, this method reflects previous research. I think that's a much more concise, more elegant sentence. It takes out some of those unnecessary words and syllables. The next two have the same construction, unnecessary verbs. We will obtain measurements, or we will perform evaluations. Why say that when you could simply say, we will measure XYZ, we will evaluate XYZ. And the last example is the same as from the previous slide. Emphasis is a nominalized form of the verb emphasize. The first phase of our research will emphasize developing a prototype. So noticing when you've introduced unnecessary words can help you to get rid of those words, right? To make your prose more direct. Oh, and I see a comment. On the last slide, why use we have carried out versus we carried out? Yes, the example on the left is simple past versus it's past tense versus present perfect tense. There's a subtle difference between those two tenses. We have carried out. You can use the have plus a participle, have given, have analyzed, to suggest actions that have happened in the past that are still affecting the present. So we have carried out preliminary research. I don't think it would be a huge deal if you just said we carried out preliminary research. You don't have to use the perfect tense. That's just what I changed it to when I was revising. Like I said, there's a shade of difference in those two, but I wouldn't say that it's like a mistake to go with one or the other. All right, so I also want to talk about verb tense and verb constructions. So the first one is a fairly simple point, the present progressive. This is when you see is or are plus an ing verb, which is called a gerund. The present progressive can almost always be replaced by the simple present. The PI is currently leading a project on XYZ. This can very easily be changed to the PI currently leads a project on XYZ. There really is no difference in meaning between the two. So just go ahead and use the one that is shorter. Second one, dingling modifiers. These are the bane of my existence as an editor. They drive me nuts. They're common in everyday speech, and if you start listening for them, you'll hear them everywhere. In less formal speech, you'll often encounter them in constructions such as a child, school was very difficult. That sentence is a problem because there's no actor for that phrase as a child. It refers to nothing in the sentence, so it's incorrect. And I'll give you another example on the screen in case that's easier to follow. Dingling modifiers are phrases that describe a subject, but that subject is missing or unclear. So take a look at this example. After completing the initial study, our research goals were modified. This phrase, after completing the initial study, someone did the completion, right? So someone completed the study, but we don't know who based on the sentence. We can figure it out based on the word our, but on a grammatical level, there is no actor for that phrase. So you can easily change it by introducing a subject into the sentence, or a different subject, I should say. After completing the initial study, we modified our research goals. And this is actually a twofer. You not only get rid of the dingling modifier, you also get rid of the passive voice here by explaining who did the completing and who did the modifying of the research goals. So dingling modifiers, beware. Final one, this is just an easy tip, I guess, for saving space in your document, because again, that's something I am asked to do a lot. You can revise your possessives by flipping their structure rather than saying the primary goal of our project is to, you can change it to our project's primary goal. So instead of using of, just use apostrophe s. This is maybe not the best choice in every single case, but again, it's an easy way to save space in your document. And often space is at a premium. All right, so by way of review, I'd like to return to a comment I offered earlier. Editing is not just about fixing errors, but about achieving clarity and purpose. Whether you seek out professional assistance or take a crack at editing your own work or that of a friend, remember that it's a necessary step in crafting a successful proposal. Be sure to move beyond spell check and beyond editing software. Take a close look at the structure of your sentences and paragraphs, and don't be afraid to rearrange them or rewrite them entirely in order to make them more appealing to your readers. Building editing into the process requires some advanced planning, but the result is a stronger proposal that more effectively communicates your brilliant ideas. So I'd like to thank all of you again for coming to this workshop today. The next slide just gives a preview of workshops to come. Our workshop on proposal layouts and graphics is in a couple of weeks. And yeah, I think that's pretty much all I have today. And we can take questions once the recording is off.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. That was fantastic. I know it's always challenging to listen to what we do wrong, but you did it lovely and made us feel very accepting of our errors. So I appreciate that.
Oh yes, thank you. They happen to everyone, whether you are a novice writer or you're a professional editor.
And I caught myself on many of them. So I can certainly I'm going to stop the recording if I can figure that out.